The Immortal. It's one of those games, and I think you know the type. The ones that have aged very, very poorly, and they're full of questionable design choices, yet something makes it memorable. Call it magic, character, presentation, or all of the above. To me, The Immortal definitely has whatever this quality might be. The game is designed by Will Harvey and published by EA. I don't know any of his original titles. They're called Lancaster, Zany Golf, and then The Immortal. The game was originally published in 1990 for the Apple II GS and then ported to Amiga, DOS, NES, Mega Drive, and they've got various differences, adjusting to the hardware and censorship on the NES's part, but to me the most noteworthy and perhaps the most important change is in the soundtrack. The original Apple II GS soundtrack was composed by one Douglas Fulton, his pieces being appropriately orchestral fantasy fare, whereas Rob Hubbard made the tunes for the DOS, Mega Drive and NES versions, but we'll get into that later. The Immortal is one of those puzzle-solving isometric adventures with a lot of length, and sadly, padded length. The game is fairly notorious for its myriad of death scenes for a good reason, since you'll be staring at them a lot, and there are so many freaking ways to die as well. On some versions, the first room has a death trap. The first room! The game is all about the linear type of puzzle solving and avoiding instant death. There's pitfalls, acid oozes, generic traps, and even the pickup items can and in most cases will kill you if used the wrong way or at the wrong time. I've completed the game once years ago, but, full disclosure, not without a walkthrough, cause it's really freaking obtuse. An example of a puzzle would be a room with the Goblin King. You can beat his guards, but the big man himself is invulnerable, so how do you go about killing him? You plant the toxic spores you found on the first stash of loot on the patch of dirt within the room, you exit and re-enter the room to find the spores grown into mushrooms, which apparently were too much for the king to handle, so then you give him water to get a hint for the next puzzle. It's convoluted and hard to follow, and it does feel deliberate, trial and error if you will. That's not to say that the game is bad, no, not by any means. Some of the puzzles and interactions are actually kinda clever. There's one part where you have to leave a piece of granite on the floor and lure an acidic ooze over the top of it to have it corrode the stone so you can access the gem inside, which you then use in combination to open a door to the next level. And if memory serves, the last boss of the game was this clunky but somehow ingenious shuffle of key items and spells used at the right time. These stages offer a fair amount of variety as well, from generic dungeons to flooded tunnels, and there's even a spider cave in some versions. You'll have to make your way down several levels where things mostly look different, but they play out the same. Puzzles, insta-kill traps, and some combat. And speaking of the combat, as you've seen on the footage, the game tries something different here. So when you run into an enemy, and as far as I remember, this only applies to goblins and trolls, the two dominant races within the labyrinthine dungeon. So when you bump into one, the game switches to this dual screen, where you have to dodge and launch attacks. You've got two swings and a stab plus dodges to the left and right, and the enemies use the exact same rules, and the only differences are in their health and damage and fatigue values. You see, every time you swing a weapon, this red bar goes up, and that's your fatigue, or stamina if you like. The higher the bar gets, the longer it takes to swing the blade. And the green bar, of course, is your health. And then, if, or more like when, you take a beating, you can replenish it by sleeping on a pile of straw, which also forwards the story through text-based dream sequences. It's a fantasy game, so there's a semblance of plot, of course, and it is fairly standard. You're a wizard in search of your mentor, who left in search of the Fountain of Youth. There's a few twists and turns along the way, and a small semblance of choice as to how you reach the game's conclusion. So the game's got a lot to whinge about, the padded length / difficulty being chief among them. So why do I like the game? Why do I bother to talk about it if all I seem to do is bash it? Well, it's got that undeniably well done fantasy charm. It just reeks of old school classic fantasy, and it pulls it off well, and I've got to give it bonus points for the most steel-worthy names for role-playing characters. The cast's got characters like Mordemir, Donric, Yulindor, Drool, and so on. It's simply charming to me, but similarly to Witchhaven, no matter how cool the premise and the ideas behind the game may be, it has to be entertaining, and if you can get past the trial and error gameplay, a la save states, then you might be able to get a lot out of it. And lastly, as I prefaced it at the start, it's got this magic factor, and to me most of it stems from Mr. Hubbard's compositions. These tunes in the game have been ingrained in my brain for years, and I doubt they'll ever go away. So, that's the Immortal. If you're interested, then give it a go, and if not, at least check out the soundtrack. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.